Hi YouTube, welcome to another edition of Horror Hounds, and for this video we're going to be talking about perfect horror movies. So horror movies that of course I really love, but movies that just have a bit more of an edge and are just perfect in what they do, and there is nothing that I could think to change to make them any better. I couldn't add anything, I couldn't take them away. They are just so good. They are perfect horror movies. So we'll get straight into it. I'll let you know what they are. Stick around until the end if you can, because I am going to list some great movies that didn't quite make the list, and I'll explain why. So yeah, there's not many, and I have to be quite strict with this criteria, as you can imagine. But we'll get into it, and I'll let you know what they are. Okay, so first perfect horror movie, in my opinion, is Alien, which is just about as well put together a film as you can get. So, simple story, although they do have a little bit more going on in the background, but simple story of an alien creature killing off the crew of a spaceship. But I like that there's a bit more to it, in the sense that it has like its own biological system. I thought that was really clever how they set that up. And I really like how it's set in space, but it's kind of not flashy or cutting edge. It looks like these people have been up there for a long time, and it's very kind of working class kind of spaceship. The look of the alien is fantastic. It's iconic. It's got some great effects. And most notably for me, for Alien, is some of the best assemble of characters that I've seen in a movie. So all the characters in this are fantastic. They're likeable, realistic people. They're all believable. I care for every single one. It's one of the very few horror films where I don't want to see any of the characters killed off, which is almost unheard of. And they just come across as very kind of ordinary, let's say working class people. They're not overly macho people or overly strong people that are going to obviously take the alien out. It's and it's very scary for that reason. So yeah, it's just so well put together. I know there's kind of like the director's cut, and there's rumours of a really long, sort of like 4-hour cut of Alien or something, but I think what we got is sheer perfection, and it just works so well and holds up really well now. So first perfect movie on the list is Alien. Next movie on the list is An American Werewolf in London, which is a great mix. You've got a great mix of horror and comedy here. It's done really well, it's written really well, and the balance between the scary aspects of the film and the more humorous aspects are done really well. Great likeable character with David Kessler, and of course the infamously amazing practical effects, arguably the best you'll ever see in a horror movie. Probably the best werewolf movie ever, and just everything that's thrown into this is just top notch. Not just the effects, but the characters and their interactions and the dynamics of it, and everything about it. It's just an excellent movie. So yeah, another one that there's nothing that I can think about this one that will make it any better. It's an awesome movie. So I wanted to include a more modern horror movie on this list, and the one that I've gone for is the Autopsy of Jane Doe, which is a masterfully put together movie. Really creepy stuff, and again kind of very simple, but what it does with what it has is incredible. So this is this sees a father-son pair of sort of morticians who get this cadaver come in, and she has horrific internal injuries, just a long list of awful things going on inside her which have thought to have killed her, but she's kind of perfectly preserved on the outside, so much so that you could never have these internal injuries and broken bones and everything going on inside her. You could never have that and not be damaged on the outside. So they really don't know what's going on, and they work through the night to try and establish a cause of death, but increasingly creepy things start to happen around the mortuary, and I'll leave it there. But this is just an incredible movie, Very, very engaging. It keeps you intrigued throughout because you really want to know what's happened to this young lady. Great performances by Brian Cox and Emil Hirsch as the father and son team. And it pretty much just takes place within kind of one room with 3 or 4 characters and this dead body. And really does well in the creepy factor as well, because you don't know what's gone on, and then all this stuff starts happening, and yeah, it's really well put together film. One of the best modern horror films I've ever seen. And I put this one on the list because I considered other films, but this one does seem to be kind of universally recognised as being a great film. I thought of things like Paranormal Activity or Hereditary, which I thought were great films, but they can be a bit divisive. But The Autopsy of Jane Doe does seem to be universally recognised as an excellent film. And it really is. If you want a modern horror film where, in the spirit of this list, is just perfectly made, definitely check this film out. It's fantastic. So that's The Autopsy of Jane Doe. Next up is The Evil Dead, which for me is just a prime example of B-movie gory nonsense, just done incredibly well. So again, simple plot: a group of kids go into the woods, into a cabin, and are attacked by demons after the incantation is read out while they're staying at the cabin. And we all know Evil Dead, you've all seen this one. Ash and his friends have to do battle against the snarling demons. But this film just does not let up. It sets out to just throw all this crazy demonic stuff at you, and it does it, and it's entertaining, it's gory, it's shocking, it's funny in places, and it does it with a real kind of enthusiasm and gusto for this kind of low budget gory filmmaking. Great effects, some great practical effects. You've got an iconic character with Ash Williams in this one, and amazing camera work as well. When I mention Evil Dead, I always have to say the camera work in this movie is incredible, and really is like nothing else that you see in this sort of early 80s gory exploitation filmmaking. It really sets the film apart. And yeah, I just love how every bit of it is just gleefully done. And they just, as you're watching it, you can see they are throwing everything into it that they can, that the budget will allow, to make this the craziest horror film you will see. And I really like that. I like the passion behind it. And yeah, and it's just a great film in every way. So I really wanted to include Evil Dead on this list. Next up on this list of perfect movies is The Exorcist, which I'm sure I don't need to talk much about. I would probably go out and say this is the greatest horror movie ever made. It's not my favourite horror movie, it's up there, but yeah, this is probably your greatest horror film ever made. Very daring for the time. No one had ever tackled a religious horror like this and done it in such a way. And it's amazing, really, because I think it's genuinely a terrifying film. But it's made with such an elegance about it. It's really beautifully made. It doesn't feel like a shocky horror film as it could have easily been. It's made with a real sort of air of Hollywood filmmaking, juxtaposed with the horrific horror elements. It's a fascinating film to watch in that respect, and of course just so well done. Revolutionary at the time, still revolutionary now. Yeah, greatest horror film ever made, like I say, probably. So had to include The Exorcist on this list. I know it's getting sort of the remake treatment, or as a new trilogy coming out. I can't say I'm very enthusiastic for it. I don't think it's necessarily a smart move to do because of the legacy that this movie has and the power that it still has. I think they're up against it with that one. But yeah, as far as the original goes, can't get better than The Exorcist. Next up is David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly, which is a great movie, and in terms of being a perfect film, there's just no element of this that I could think to change to make it better. It's so well put together. Jeff Goldblum perfectly cast as the ambitious but misguided Seth Brundle. I love the story. I love that it's a horror film that evokes quite a lot of emotion, and it's quite sad and it's quite tragic. Not a lot of horror films sort of deal with the emotive side of things, and it does that, and it does it really, really well. You really do feel for the character and empathise with him. The horror elements are all there, and they're fantastic. The gruesome, slimy practical effects that get increasingly bad over the course of the film are just fantastic. I love the look of the Brundle fly. It's an awesome looking monster, and yeah, everything about it is fantastic. It was one that I didn't necessarily immediately think of for this video, but when it came to it, like I say, there's just no element that I could think of changing to make this one any better, so hence threw it on the list. So that's the 80s version of The Fly. So I wanted to have some vintage, old classic horror represented on this list, and I've gone for what, in my opinion, is probably the most maybe the most iconic horror film ever, certainly from that time, with Frankenstein. Again, very famous film. Boris Karloff playing the iconic monster, and again, this is just another one that, at the time, this movie had everything I think you could hope to see from a horror movie. Like I say, you've got the iconic monster that looks awesome. Great performance by Boris Karloff. I like that you've got quite a cutting edge story for the 1930s in terms of bringing someone back to life and using the lightning and the electricity to do that. It's another film that handles the emotions very well. You do feel a lot of sympathy and empathy for the creature. It's quite sad, and for a film from the 30s to still evoke those kind of emotions is pretty impressive. You've got the horror aspects. It's pretty scary. You're not going to get the gore and the craziness from a movie from the 1930s, but during that time, I don't know. I don't think you could have hoped for anything more. And this was just an incredibly well-made film, and like I say, it's still massively iconic now. So yeah, when it comes to those early 30s Universal monsters, Frankenstein is the one that immediately comes to mind as probably the best made and probably the most iconic. So I thought I'd include this one on the list. So next up we have Fright Night, which is a personal favourite of mine. This has been an absolute favourite movie of mine since being a kid, and it just has everything to make this one a highly entertaining horror movie. So initially I love the story of a guy who loves horror films, and his neighbour moves in. His neighbour's a vampire. No one will believe him, but so he enlists the help of a TV vampire killer, Peter Vincent. But it turns out, in a bit of a twist, he's a bit of a coward and doesn't want to know. So I love that. That was a great dynamic to the film. It's got loads of cool practical effects in it. It's a vampire movie, but you've got a few other things thrown in as well. You've got like the flying bat monster. You've got the bit with sort of the werewolf in the movie. And of course, Jerry Dandridge, played by Chris Sarandon, in my opinion, one of the very best portrayals of a vampire ever. I think he's very underrated in this role, and I'd put him right up there alongside Christopher Lee and Bela Lugosi as just one of the best on-screen vampires. He's so good, and his charm and suaveness really comes across, and he's just a joy to watch in that film. It's one of my favourite roles ever. And you've got the other great characters like Evil Ed and things like that. But it's scary, it's funny, it's quite knowing. I think it was made for horror fans. There's a lot of horror references, and he's always watching Hammer films on TV. And yeah, this is one that I've just always loved. I always find it really entertaining. And yeah, one of the best examples of fun 80s horror, Fright Night. Definitely a perfect horror film, in my opinion. Okay, next movie on the list of perfect horror movies is Hellraiser. Clive Barker's Hellraiser, and such a dark movie. If you want a horror film that genuinely takes you to a dark place and then explores that dark place, no film does it better than Hellraiser. It's a really scary one. Terrified me as a kid. But it's one that I've always loved. Really interesting story of this kind of other world of kind of extreme pleasure and pain, and the Cenobite demons that sort of oversee it. And I love the fact that it always occurred to me that the Cenobite monsters are neither goodies nor baddies. They just look after that world, and if they're summoned, they come along and they judge you accordingly. And yeah, I just always thought that was an interesting way to portray it. They could have been sort of just slathering monsters that came at you. It was something cool, but I don't think it would have had the same effect that Hellraiser has. But this is another one, some amazing 80s effects. The effects in this are just incredible, particularly the chains and the way they go into people's skin and pull them apart. It looks pretty horrible. It's really next level when it comes to that kind of thing. And really shocked me when I was younger, because I was kind of accustomed to sort of gore and the more visceral effects, but the people actually being torn with hooks was, like, wow, pretty nasty stuff. So yeah, it really sort of came across as kind of next level dark horror, but it also has a few of the more kind of schlocky practical effect monster moments, which were the hallmark of the 80s. So a real good mix here, mainly sort of really serious dark stuff, but it does have a bit of a nod of the more crazy practical effects heavy 1980s. And of course Pinhead has become a huge horror icon. And yeah, not a lot of movies achieve the feel that Hellraiser does, and I've always really respected it for that. So yeah, and again, definitely no elements in this one that I could think to make it better. I think Clive Barker absolutely nailed it with this this movie. So yeah, that's Hellraiser. Next up we have Hammer Horror's Dracula, or Horror of Dracula, which is an amazing movie. Probably not my favourite Hammer movie, but anything with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing is always going to be cinematic perfection, in my opinion. And this is one of the absolute best with those two in it together. The way they represent kind of the evil and the moral side is really interesting. Christopher Lee is just absolutely amazing as Count Dracula and portraying that evil personification, and I love that juxtaposed to Peter Cushing's moralistic Van Helsing character, because he was such a genuine, kind, nice gentleman, and you can kind of feel that weaved into the film. And yeah, I just love that kind of presentation. I love the Hammer look, that kind of rich, coloured, kind of extravagant look that they had. It really suits this adaptation of Dracula. Love the dramatic music, all that kind of things. This was when Hammer was, absolutely in perfection. When they were making their movies, they were just, you couldn't touch them. It's some of the best horror films of that time. And yeah, I think Dracula is one of the best representations of that, with a great adaptation, and Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing in their iconic roles. So yeah, I wanted to include this one on the list, the first Hammer horror, Dracula. Next up on the list is Psycho, which is really one of the key movies that kind of brought horror cinema into the modern setting. This kind of moved films out of the Gothic castles and into modern day America. Of course, I'm not going to go into the story. I'm sure you've all seen this one, but you kind of forget just how revolutionary this was, and the things that Alfred Hitchcock did to change it up were just incredible. Anthony Perkins is perfectly cast as Norman Bates. He's so good in that role. It's a masterclass of acting from him. Janet Leigh is great, and just the casting of her character is genius. Because she was a big star at the time, and having her star in the movie and then killing her off so early on in the film was just unheard of. I can't imagine how shocking that must have been, seeing this in the day. And even the casting of Janet Leigh, because she was, up until this point, she mainly starred in sort of musicals and romantic comedies. So again, seeing her in this role must have blown people's mind. And the fact she gets killed off was, yeah, incredible. Amazing twist at the end. I love how it's set up to eventually reach that climax. It looks great. The music, of course, is iconic. Yeah, everything about it. Hitchcock just nailed this. Made an amazing horror movie and changed the landscape of cinema. So it's like, how could you not include this one on this list? So yeah, that is the original Psycho. Next up is John Carpenter's The Thing. I'm sure I don't need to explain this one too much, but another movie that I've absolutely loved since I was a kid. So you got a few things here. You've got an absolutely amazing array of characters. All the characters in this are cool and bring their own bit of flair to the movie. Kurt Russell is just one of the coolest actors around, and he's fantastic in this. I love the setting, the Antarctic setting. Gives a good sort of isolated feel and feel of being cut off. And then I think most notably for The Thing is probably the best practical effects you'll ever see in a film. There's a few other contenders, but The Thing has to be up there. They are just insanely good. And yeah, I love every minute of this film. One of my all-time favourite movies. John Carpenter's my favourite director, so yeah, nothing about this I would want to change to make it any better, including the ending. I know a lot of people, they say they'd like more from the ending, and people have always called for a sequel to kind of give a continuation on what happens, but for me it ended perfectly. I love the ambiguous ending. I love that you can speculate, and people are still speculating as to who's who at the end of the film, but that kind of just adds to the power of it, in my opinion. So yeah, The Thing, one of the best horror films of all time. And last on this list for perfect horror movies is Lucio Fulci's Zombie, or Zombie Flesh Eaters. So I'm a huge George Romero fan. I love Romero zombies, but in my opinion, Lucio Fulci created the greatest zombie movie with this one. He absolutely nails the horror genre and the zombie subgenre in this movie. He just, every single element he gets, and he completely delivers. Everything from the griminess and the dirtiness of a zombie film, the scary parts, the fear, the isolation, the kind of the voodoo backstory, the gore, the violence, the action side, the impending dread, everything. He just absolutely knocks it out of the park and creates the ultimate zombie film. I love the look of the zombies in this. I think it probably has the best zombies of any film. And they always said they had no money to create the zombies, which is just even more incredible. It has the best music to a zombie film ever. If you want to hear the perfect musical representation of a zombie, it's in this film. You've got some amazing horror set pieces. The splinter through the eye, the zombie fighting the shark, the sort of shootout in the hospital at the end, the incredible gore effects. The acting's not too bad for a dubbed Italian horror film. It's actually pretty good as far as they go. Great ending. Yeah, there's nothing about this one that I could touch. And like I say, just Fulci was on fire when he made this movie. He just absolutely nailed it. I don't know if he did it intentionally. I like to think he was on his game so much that he just knew exactly what he wanted to make, and this was it. But whether he did or not, for me, he created the best zombie movie ever with this one. So that's my perfect horror movie. Stick around. I'm going to just go through a couple of close contenders and explain why they didn't quite make the list. But let me know what you think of these ones. Do you agree? Or if not, what would you change about these movies? That'd be a really interesting thing to know. And yeah, I'll come at you with some close contenders next. Okay guys, thank you for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. As I say, I'll just give a bit of coverage on some movies that almost made the list, but just explain a couple of the reasons why, just see if you guys agree or not. So I'll start with the Romero movies. Night of the Living Dead almost made the list, but I like my zombie films to be kind of gory, and of course there's not much in that. Totally understandable because it's the 60s. But I just thought I'd leave it off for that reason. I had to be quite strict with the criteria. Dawn of the Dead, great movie. I'm not a huge fan of how the zombies look in that with the blue face paint. I think there's zombie films with better looking zombies. So like Zombie Flesh Eaters, which made the list, and Day of the Dead, for example, had better zombies. The Shining nearly made the list. But for that one, I never liked Shelley Duvall's performance in it all that much. She's a great actress. She does a great job in the film. There's just something about her role in that which I don't know if someone else might have done it better. And I know she had a hard time on set. Stanley Kubrick was reportedly really not very nice to her. And that kind of comes across in the film. She does a great job. She really encapsulates that terrifying experience. But I don't know, there's always just something slightly off about her performance, which, I don't know, I kept it off the list for that reason. Like I said, I did have to be strict with the criteria. Carrie nearly made the list, but there's just a few other Stephen King films that I go to more than that one. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think a lot of people might have been wanting that one on the list. Almost a perfect movie. I kind of don't like the scene, the dinner time scene with the endless shots of Marilyn Byrne screaming. It kind of got to me a little bit. I found it a bit much. I'd like maybe a bit more of a nuanced scene, kind of just showing a bit more of what goes on. Other than that, it would have been a perfect movie. And I think that is the ones that kind of were close to making the list, but didn't quite. There would have been others as well. So yeah, I just thought I'd explain away a couple of the ones that didn't get on the list, just in case you're wondering. But like I say, let me know what you think of this video. Let me know what your perfect movies are. I'd love to know. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.